Our next speaker is Jason Caldwell from Sanborn Map Company. Jason is the Vice President of Business Development and Sales at the Sanborn Map Company. He has 20 years of experience in GIS, remote sensing, and mapping environments. He has completed business consulting activities that have provided clarity and visionary directions for a wide range of customers, including many governmental and energy-related customers. Jason started his career in a map production setting prior to his consulting assignments and uses his combined experience to provide education about the power of remote sensing and integrated geospatial solutions. With that, I would like to hand it over to Jason.
Thanks so much, Yoko. Appreciate it. So we're excited to present today, and we've been working with the county for a number of years. And in general, a little bit of background about myself. I think Yoko just did a great introduction, but one of the things I always like talking about is how technology has changed over the time and space in terms of my career as a kind of entry point for this discussion today. When I first started working at Sanborn, I was doing map production work, as Yoko mentioned, and really there was a requirement for us to capture 1,500 points an hour as I was actually digitizing information for the company. And today we're going to talk about Lidar as well as multispectral imagery, but more specifically to Lidar, the technologies that we're using today allow us to capture, well over 2 million points a second. And so really there's been this transition in terms of thought process and how you can use this technology to really provide better information back to customers. And in today's conversation, we're really going to focus on how we can use Lidar and multispectral imagery for both planning on wildfire side of things, as well as the recovery efforts on the wildfire side of things. So we'll jump right into it. So from an agenda perspective, I'm going to do a real quick company overview for those of you that aren't familiar with Sanborn, and then we're going to talk about a couple of the technologies today, primarily the multispectral and the Lidar. And then we're going to jump into what the problem is associated with wildfires, and then how we use these types of data sets that we provide to many of our customers, including to Santa Clara, and how we use this type of data for both response and recovery. So for those of you that don't know, Sanborn is the oldest map company in the US. We started making maps in 1866. And from that time to current, we've been one of the companies that really has been on the leading edge in terms of technology that's used for mapping and GIS. Just as an example, we were the first company that produced a digital ortho photo. The customer actually was Las Vegas and Clark County. We put that on an 8-track tape and we put it in a refrigerated truck, and we actually drove it to the county from Colorado Springs, where our headquarters are at. So it's just an interesting, dynamic, or a little bit of a point of interest that I like to make. The other one that I always think is interesting is looking at the original maps that Sanborn created back at the turn of the century. And there's a lot of information on these maps. If you're not familiar with them, I definitely would encourage you, if you're a map geek like me, to go back and look at them. This happens to be a map that was created in Colorado Springs, which is where I was raised and where I'm currently at now. And this actually ends up being the elementary school that I went to, which is called Ivy Wild Elementary School. I always like showing a little bit of my personal life associated with this. What's kind of cool about this map is this elementary school has been decommissioned and now is a brewery. So I can actually drink beer in my 4th grade classroom, which is kind of cool. So in terms of overall who Sanborn is, we are headquartered in Colorado Springs. We do have offices across the US, including we have some on-site offices in the Sacramento area. And we also have offices on the East Coast as well. As part of those offices, we have a lot of licensed professionals. We have certified mapping scientists, we have PhD level people, program management professionals. I know Bridget Marcotte, she's on the call today, and she's our project manager that represents Santa Clara County. And she's a PMP, and she resides actually in Austin, Texas. A lot of other certifications really help us provide the professional service that we provide to our customers. We also are a company that own aircraft, and we collect this data as a part of the service that we provide to our customers, including Santa Clara County. These systems include Lidar systems, vertical ortho imagery only systems, and then 5-way oblique systems. Some of the newer technologies that we've been working with recently include sonar-based hydrographic acquisition systems. This is for bathymetric type of mapping, and then mobile Lidar and imagery systems. I know Steve Steinberg talked a little bit about these types of systems in his presentation. So Sanborn is really on the leading edge when it comes to data collection and remote sensing capabilities. In terms of our qualifications, we've done a lot of work within California. Since I've been at the company, we've mapped well over 200,000 square miles within the state. As I mentioned, we're a current vendor to Santa Clara County, as well as Solano County, as well as many other customers that you see listed here. So that's always exciting to be able to show that we have quite a bit of experience within the state and doing work within the region. The one thing I'll mention is that some of the work that we have done in the region, specifically to the LiDAR side of things, and we're going to talk about this a lot today, that has been coordinated and funding has been contributed by the US GIS. If you're not familiar with the 3DEP program and the LiDAR projects that the USGS is really championing for the entire lower 48, it's a really exciting time because there's a lot of existing data out there that can be used, which you'll realize later in this presentation why that's so important. So when you think about Sanborn, we've already covered a little bit of this, but to be able to provide the services that we provide to our customers, we feel like we have to have the acquisition capabilities in-house to be able to actually control those assets and provide that to customers, have the highly qualified human resources like Bridget Marcotte. She's on the phone today. She really provides the service and customer service pieces that our customers are looking for. The sensors, really a robust software development capability, ISO certification. We are a qualified QMS system that gets qualified every year. And we go through that audit every year to make sure that we maintain that certification. And then proven project management capabilities, we crunch all that together, and that's really what provides our customers with the highest level of quality and professional services that we provide. So when you think about Sanborn, we always think about it from a geospatial value data chain. When we look at this pyramid, the data map production, which is the basis for everything else on that pyramid, is very important. This is where the LiDAR, the digital imagery, the oblique imagery, the topographic maps, anything that we create at that baseline is important for the rest of the steps within the GIS value chain. And that's really what this presentation is going to be about as we talk about wildfires, that it's one thing to have this data, but then it's another thing to make the data actionable, to be able to do additional things to the data, like add value to it, add intelligence, add change detection information to it, and then actually be able to provide, software visualization systems and decision support systems using that data to enable the customer to be able to get to the answers quicker, to be able to visualize the information in different ways. It has become a very important aspect of what we provide, and definitely on the wildfire side of things. So kind of getting into the two technologies that I'm going to reference today, for those that aren't familiar, LiDAR is an acronym. It stands for light detection and ranging. And basically what this is a system that is mounted to a mobile platform, typically an aircraft in this discussion. And it essentially, because we know the speed of light, we can send points from the aircraft to the ground and to the surface of the earth, and they respond off that, they reflect off that, and give us the information back. So basically what you get back is a set of points of XYZ location that allow you to provide a pretty accurate digital surface model, digital elevation model, and other things of that nature. Ortho imagery is definitely a little bit more commonplace over the years. You're probably familiar with this as well, but this essentially removes any type of terrain displacement within the surface of the earth so that you can actually measure accurately within the orthophoto itself. Orthophoto imagery is very important, but what we're going to talk about in this presentation is the physical visualization that we see every day is in RGB, but there's another component of a lot of ortho data sets, which is the near infrared data, that is very important for any type of vegetation mapping, including the wildfire hazard assessment type of work that we do. And so if you are getting ortho photos, highly recommended that you also obtain the 4th band, which is the near infrared channel that gives you this additional ability. All right, so we're going to jump into the meat of the presentation in terms of this use case. The wildfire problem, what is that problem? I think, California, you guys have probably seen the worst of it across the United States, but Colorado, where I'm headquartered, has had quite a few years of disasters as well. And Oregon and a lot of the West really has been challenged in terms of drought conditions and a significant amount of fuel loads that have essentially not been taken care of over the course of 20, 30, 50 years. And so it really has presented us with a challenge as we continue to see, the drought conditions not necessarily change and the fuel loads continue to be there. This is a challenge that we're all faced with, and trying to figure out how to mitigate this risk, and also try to figure out how to plan for it and recover when the situation does happen. That is one of the things that I'll mention, and I think that the message here, 10 years ago we talked about how do we mitigate risk, how do we stop this from happening. What I would tell you is I think there has been this change of philosophy in terms of that attitude, and it's not if it happens, it's when it happens, right? If you're living in the urban interface with the wildland and vegetation areas, really the thought process is now you're going to have a wildfire that impacts you likely in your lifetime. And the question is, how do you survive that? How do you protect your assets to essentially get through those types of situations? So the thought process has changed, and the message has changed from, if to when, and how do you work through that? So we'll talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. So here you have an example of the type of data sets over the years that Sanborn has provided specifically for risk mitigation. So this is typically done, well before we get into any type of recovery situation. We're trying to provide information associated with, the surface fuels, the canopy fuels, what type of historical fires have been out there. And then you try to crunch that into some intelligence information that gives you rate of spread, wildland fire susceptibility, fire effects, and levels of concern. So it's like a data stack similar to other data stacks that you've had, but very specific to wildfire. And the way we get to these data stacks is through high resolution imagery as well as elevation data. Here's just a simplistic view of the type of work that we've done. This is actually an example coming out of Casper Mountain in Wyoming, but you can see on the left image there, this is a near infrared image, an ortho image. And then on the right there is actually the vegetation mapping that we completed. This was a simple 13 land cover class fuels model that we completed. But really the goal here was to try to show that we can use AI and ML, this is semi-automated and fully automated type of approaches to extract out different vegetation types from that near infrared imagery. And the way we do that, when you think about the science behind kind of the automation that is created for this type of work, is that we can actually look at the near infrared information. Near infrared is interesting because it does allow you to look at what we as humans see in the green space to understand the level of vegetation type that is within that green space that is actually shown within the near infrared. So the sensitivity within that type of product is much higher and allows for the computer vision and algorithms to process that data into a vegetation map that we can use for creating vegetation fuels models. Once we have all that data, there's a lot of different ways to try to visualize this information. This is just an example of taking all the different type of data stacks that I was showing you previously and bringing this into a Google Earth environment where we've actually overlaid it in a 3D perspective. A lot of times people like this type of approach because for the non-GIS users that aren't used to looking at two-dimensional maps, this allows for the commissioners and the other folks that are much more intuitive in terms of the visualization piece of it to be able to get a better grasp in terms of what's happening within the terrain as well as what's happening within the risk factors that we show here. So it's just another way to be able to demonstrate and provide information back to our customers in terms of how we visualize the data. As we work ourselves up that pyramid, there's some additional decision support capabilities that Sanborn has provided in the past. This is an example of that, right? So on the left, what you have is a fuels model. There's concern about specifically fuels type 4 and 5 in this case. And what we want to do within this app is do some predictive analytics, right? So we know what's on the ground now. We want to go through and really within what we would consider a term now that's used, a digital twin, take that information and be able to actually start mitigating those fuels within the digital environment to try to understand what's going to happen, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years out to those areas in terms of what's going to grow back in those areas. So the idea here is that you try to make sure that the money that's going to be spent to go in the field and do these mitigation efforts, you can actually look at different scenarios and different areas where you can actually try to get a better feel for how that mitigation is going to work and how that's going to provide value back to the community as well as to the government in terms of mitigating the risk. So cool concept and something that a lot of people are starting to use these days. So I talked about this idea of not if, but when. And so this is actually an example that is pretty close to my house. This is just west of the neighborhood that I live in Colorado Springs. This was a fire that happened in Colorado that was called the Waldo Canyon Fire. This specific event was interesting because the neighborhood that actually ended up losing over 300 houses as associated with this fire did significant amount of vegetation mitigation work. Sanborn several years ago, actually 2008, 2009 timeframe, produced a map for the state of Colorado. This is the map that you see here. This is showing the fuels load and the risk potential. And so it was identified a long time ago that these areas coming off this Flying W Ranch area were of particular risk because of the vegetation that was sitting next to them and the urban interface that they had. So it was a scary time because we knew that fire was there. It came down in a single day, and it happened to be that there was a weather event that impacted that fire that actually pushed the fire into the urban interface. And as I said, these people and these neighborhoods in the city of Colorado Springs did significant amount of effort to mitigate any vegetation that were near these houses, and they still lost 300 houses, right? So, really coming out of this event, it was understood that, now this really changes the impact, and we have to be more prepared. We have to be prepared for when we need to go into a recovery stage. And it really, I think, set the precedent for what the rest of the country is looking at, including California, which is, hey, you guys, even if you do these different mitigation practices, there's still a chance that you could have an event that typically is affected by weather or some other event that is going to impact these structures in a way that isn't necessarily going to be positive. So how do we, recover from that when that happens? How do we better prepare for that when that happens is really what the rest of the presentation is about. So disaster response. So really, when we've talked to our customers, FEMA and others, it's trying to identify, locate, and deliver information in a timely fashion. So when there is a neighborhood that gets impacted, we've used this type of approach both on hurricane and wildfire. We're going to focus on wildfire today, but when the disaster happens, what are we able to do fairly quickly to be able to provide situational awareness information on the ground and really assess, what the best technology is to deploy information back to the stakeholders so that they can start the recovery phase sooner, quicker, faster. So there's critical factors here, right? The ability to perform new data collection in a timely fashion is a very important aspect of his. Speed of delivery, how quickly can we actually make that delivery to the customer? The goal here is days, weeks, not months or years. Accuracy of the content and the analysis. So we want to make sure that accuracy is there, that it gives them the value that they're looking for. And then really the final piece here is how do we present this information to the end users, especially because some of these end users are not GIS centric type of people, so that they can take this information and provide insights and informative, and make informative decisions from the information that we provide. So the example, the pilot that we completed was actually over the Marshall Fire, which was in Boulder County, Colorado. What was interesting about this fire, and again, this gets back to the message of not if, but when, this fire happened to take place just after Christmas in Boulder County, which is incredibly rare for Colorado. Obviously, winter fires is not something that we're used to seeing. And so that was a surprise, obviously, to most people because of the event that we had. It has everything to do with how dry it was that year. We actually didn't get our first measurable snow in the Front Range of Colorado until January timeframe. And so it was interesting. We had this fire. This ended up being the most destructive fire in Colorado history in terms of the houses that we lost. And it snowed the day after the fire really impacted those houses. And so that really kind of changed how we could approach this particular event. So thinking about this, we looked at it from a perspective of remote sensing and what can we do using automated techniques and either imagery or Lidar to be able to provide the best response to the customer. So again, I mentioned it snowed, and so that really changed the approach here a little bit. So when we think about optical or using imagery as a focus, it does have limitations in terms of canopy penetration. So that's one concern. But weather was the really, really big concern here. We have snow on rooftops, we have snow on the ground, snow on the roads in a lot of cases. And so to try to use the imagery to do any type of automatic extraction was very tough, and it would require a lot of manual interpretation. So we actually moved and looked at Lidar, and we felt like the canopy vegetation penetration would be better. And then when there's a little bit of light snow that's impacting the surface, Lidar responds well off of that snow. And so we felt like that was a better technology to use in terms of understanding what was happening on the surface of the earth after that fire. So that's the way we went. We usually look at both of these technologies and try to figure out, what makes the most sense. So data processing approach, when we looked at this data, the one thing I'll mention is the baseline data that was available in this region. And I would say Santa Clara County is very similar to Boulder County in the fact that you guys have great data already available that's already been captured. And this gets back to the comment I made about the USGS and the fact that they've captured Lidar at what we call the quality level 2 across the entire United States for the most part. They're still finishing that project up, but it's getting very close. It's well above 85% completion at this point. So there is great information out there. We live in a country and in a time where imagery and Lidar has been collected for the entire country. There's recent data there that allows us to have a baseline of what was there prior to the event, prior to the emergency response. So we took that existing data that we had within Boulder County, combined with newly collected QL1 data that Sanborn collected. We did have to go through a process where we actually normalized the data, meaning that we made sure that the two data sets aligned so that we could compare and contrast. This is where we did our automatic change detection. We did a volumetric change of 2020 versus 22 building footprints. And then we integrated that data into the information, property information that we were able to attain from open sources. So timeline wise, we collected the data in one day, we calibrated the data in one day, we classified the data in one day, performed the analytics. So basically within 4 days, we were able to turn the information around back to the stakeholders in this case. I will make a couple comments because this is something that's becoming more and more popular, using AI and ML technologies to extract features out. So this is exactly what we want to be able to do for our customers, especially when we're looking at trying to turn around data within a short time frame. Trying to do any type of manual interpretation is just going to take too long and doesn't provide the value we need in this type of use case. So we did go through a process of using AI technology to be able to extract the building outlines out. And so you can kind of see here some examples of where we see anomalies within this type of data set. Just as an example here, this is called a building, but really this is a court. It did miss a building here. You have some oddities within shapes of buildings that aren't necessarily called out perfectly compared to a manual approach. However, the use case in this case is all about speed to delivery, right? So having a little bit of anomaly within the data set or a little bit of noise within the data set was acceptable to the stakeholders in this case. And I just wanted to kind of show that as an illustration to say that it's always not the most perfect data set using the AI. It's a great start and to focus on. Here's another illustration of the exact same thing, right? So what we have on the left is AI-based capture, and on the right was a manual-based capture. And so you do get some, oddities in terms of the data set itself. But again, for the use case that we're trying to derive here, you can have a little bit of noise in the data and it's still going to get you to what we're trying to achieve. If at the end of the day, you need an engineering level type of data set where every single feature is exactly where it needs to be and it's aligned correctly and all that, then it would require some level of manual interpretation above and beyond the AI that's used. So now that I've had that conversation, we looked at the Lidar DSMs from 2020, the baseline data, and then we looked at where the fire impacted this region in 2022. So right away between these two data sets, you can see where you have these recessed foundations. These are actually structures that burnt. And so you had a significant amount of, just visually, you can look at it and see where you have those houses that were lost to the event. So we went through a change detection process. For us, we do a 2D change detection as well as a 3D change detection process. We create a change map, we integrate that with the parcel information, and then we provide that information back to our customers with a visualization tool. So this is kind of an example what this looks like. This is actually an example coming out of Santa Clara County and not specific to an emergency response situation, but it gives you an idea of what's presented to the customer. You have the before, you have the after, you have the change map itself, and then you have a tabular form on each parcel showing the percentage of change that you have. And so we provided this as a user interface to the customer. Again, this was just a web app. And so any user that had the access to the URL was able to access that in terms of the Marshall Fire Response program. And the idea was here, that there's going to be a lot of users that want to look at individual properties, look at the before and after, that may not be GIS users. And so we didn't bring it into Esri or other tools. We used a Sanborn-based tool for that. However, the other thing we did is we wanted to provide information back to the end user that was valuable and provided insights. And so we did bring the information into an Esri dashboard. This was actually a pretty cool concept, I thought, because it allows for us to understand, the ownership of the property, the value of the property, and overlay that in such a way that, again, can provide actionable information back to the customer. So with very little input from any insurance company or anything else, we came up with this dashboard based on the valuation of the properties. And what I can tell you is this number here that was calculated, they just readjusted this calculation to just over $500 million. But you can see the accuracy of the value in terms of the property damage was relatively close, which was exciting for us to be able to show that there is actionable information coming out of the mapping data that gives you intelligence beyond just the actual spatial context of the data itself. So that was great. So from a lessons learned perspective, I think there's a few things to think about in terms of next steps for ourselves and for our customers, right? So the baseline data is very important. If you don't already have quality baseline data available to you, then thinking about how you can attain that data, especially in areas where likely there could be a wildfire, this is going to be an important aspect of how you fulfill an emergency response type of program like this. We need to refine the AI. I talked about some of the issues we saw in the AI ML in terms of extracting buildings out to eliminate new structures. We want to get that to be a little bit more accurate in terms of what we can provide back to our customers. There is additional applications that we see. Debris calculations is a big one there. This ends up being a huge issue for hurricanes right now. They're well over a month out from the Ian hurricane that hit southern Florida. And when you go down there, that's all you see is debris sitting on the side of the road with nowhere for that debris to go. So trying to figure out how you can actually calculate that and provide additional information back to the governments that would aid in that cleanup is important. Future developments, already talked about refining automation. We want to investigate additional open sources of off-the-shelf structures that could potentially be used as a starting point for that baseline data. And then the last piece here obviously is to integrate that new data from the actual fire event into the wildfire hazard assessment models that are used in the pre-planning stage here. So next steps from our perspective is to develop products for a different type of event or area of interest. So wildfire is a big one, right? Flooding's a big one, but there's other like tornado impacts and things of that nature. So each one of these do have a slightly different requirement in terms of how you go out and collect the data. Just as an example, on the hurricane side of things, you have the ability to move pretty quickly after the hurricane clears the area. Typically, you have some clear skies right after the hurricane clears, and you can go collect data. On the wildfire, it's a little different, right? When the wildfire gets essentially contained, there's still quite a bit of smoldering and smoke that's happening, and trying to figure out when the optimal time to go do that collection is an important aspect of it. So. All right, with that said, I think I'll stop there and open up to questions. My contact information is there, so if you want to reach out to me separately, feel free to do so. We do appreciate the time that Yoko and the county afforded to Sanborn to be able to present today. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. All right, do you have any questions? If you do, you can type them in chat. We still have 2 more minutes left. All right. I guess Jason, thank you very much for reminding us or reminding me that the baseline data is so important. And the Santa Clara County has a programmatically, we collect the imagery, and every year we collect the ortho, and every 3 years we collect the Lidar. So I guess this reminded me that it is important to have that data set consistently.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much also for your personal experience for the fire mitigation in the Colorado Springs by the vegetation management. It was pretty stunning. I guess it's an experience for you too.
Oh, it was, yeah, believe me, I think a lot of Californians have experienced the same thing, but when you can kind of see other neighborhoods that people living in and you see the houses burning, it strikes a different level with you, right? So that was definitely an interesting experience at that time. So
Yes, I
yeah,
do see one comment. Let me read that for you. I suggest that the reason you lost the 300 houses is that they are too close together.
yeah, I don't
Yes.
know if I would say that, but I can shed a little light on what happened in that event. It's interesting, as you probably know, within nicer neighborhoods, there's HOAs that have requirements years and years ago, right? They required you to have wood shake roofs. Obviously, within California and Colorado and a lot of the Western places, they've kind of eliminated those types of requirements. But what I would tell you is that there was a lot of open spaces within that specific area of burn, and then there was a lot of wood fences. And so the wood fences and the open spaces ended up acting as almost like a conduit or a highway for the wildfire to travel. So once the fire kind of got into that community and essentially past the urban interface, there was some landscape based land cover, I would call it, that impacted and allowed for the fire to spread more thoroughly within that area. So it is interesting. Obviously, every time you have an event like this, you go through and you kind of do lessons learned from a perspective of an HOA and a city in terms of zoning, and try to figure out how you can kind of prevent it further. So obviously, having metal fences versus wood fences probably would have helped the situation a little bit. So
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I see one quick question, not to you, Jason. I guess that was a link to the track B. I will put in the chat window again for everybody. So if you would like to attend the track B, here is the Zoom link. All right. Okay, so we will have the 10 minutes break, about 10 minutes break. We will return at 11:30.